And then you got to sell that from on high down through the org chart. But then we got to engage people with the how, and we got to answer their "what's in it for me" questions. And this is not simple to do. Change management is not sexy. Nobody wants to spend money on it, but I guarantee if you're not good at it, you're going to fail.
Welcome to Decision Loop, the podcast from Relic Solutions, where we speak with the experts driving transformation across retail, manufacturing, and consumer goods. From AI pilots at scale to data readiness, governance, and the human side of automation, this show is your signal through the noise. On this episode of Decision Loop, we're focusing on what actually makes AI work inside organizations. I'm joined by Ron Crabtree, CEO of MetaOps, to explore why technology alone isn't the answer, and how leaders can redesign processes, bring people along, and turn AI from a tool into a way of working. Welcome to Decision Loop podcast. Well, so Ron, I normally tend to start with a bit of an icebreaker question, and it's really about if you're using AI in your daily life, have you started using it? And it could be, are you using it in your personal life, or are you also using it in work? Has it had an impact on your life?
Well, it's had an impact on everything about what I do, right? So we certainly leverage it in our business, a great deal in the outreach side of how we're reaching out to people and using automation to streamline identifying and then what's the right, ideal customer profile and using AI to actually target people that we want to talk to about our business has certainly been something we've done. And I've started using AI on a personal basis I'm looking for a dog groomer, right? So I'll just ask AI for what should I be looking for in a dog groomer, or I want to buy a new puppy, which I am interested in doing. What should I be thinking about? What are the available choices to me within a reasonable area, within a reasonable location? So yeah, it's endemic. I don't know how anybody in business or involved with, society can avoid it.
I really wanted to ask you today about what's driving the urgency to deploy AI in manufacturing and retail. Is there something different this time, without the obvious being LLMs? So just thinking, we've been here before. It's a bit of a recurring cyclical thing. So is it different this time?
It's a lot of the same and a lot of, what's different. And, I actually have a podcast of my own called Metapod, and I have thought leaders come in from around the world. We talk about the three common challenges that manufacturing organizations face, right? The forever labor shortage, the shortage of resources to get things done, digitization, digital transformation, adoption of AI. I'm working actively with organizations in manufacturing to solve for that as we speak. And I'll tell some stories about that later. And then finally, we just have to do more with less, right? So there's endless pressure, fewer, less facility space, logistics, et cetera. And, the reality is, we're continuing to get ongoing trade pressures, reshoring here in North America, lots of competition for the same resources. The CEO of Ford Motor Company was saying, we need to hire 5,000 mechanics, right, to fix stuff in our assembly plants and across, our dealer network, and we can't find them. I think what's been, elevated is, AI is an example, one of 30 plus different tools, if you will, that we should consider in the digital transformation toolbox has certainly got everybody's attention, and it's scalable and it's accessible to literally anybody on the planet for free to leverage on what they do. So it's a competitive advantage and opportunity. I've had the opportunity to attend an event down in Texas toward the end of October, and the former CEO of GE, General Electric, was there, and Jeff was talking about, hey, people ask me all the time about, is AI going to take my job? And he said, well, no, AI will not take your job. People using AI will take your job.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. There are going to be, teams are going to get smaller, and we're hearing about things you have to do more with less. But it's almost like it's the people who don't use AI who are going to get replaced. And that's what I think about in my job as well. But actually, I wanted to talk to you about this because at the weekend, I read something from the World Economic Forum, and it was about this. I don't know if you saw it. It was a new report they came out literally like a week ago, and it was on these four scenarios for the future of work. So the four scenarios they've come up with. Scenario one is we're going to have supercharged progress because there's going to be advancements in an AI and the workforce are going to be ready for it. Scenario two is the age of displacement. AI pushes ahead. People aren't ready for it, so they replace us with bots. Scenario three is the co-pilot economy where we evolve together. And then finally, scenario four is stilted progress, where we just encounter a blocker because people aren't ready for it and it blocks the progress of automation and AI. I just want to sort of almost like set the scene because this is apparently the future of work. And it was almost like asking you really about your thoughts on that, but also on the hype around AI about are we on the cusp of something different?
Yeah, what's interesting about AI, I was talking with a gentleman 20 years ago was pioneering AI for companies like Motorola and some of these other large companies. It's all zeros and O's, and it's about the math, and it's all a math-based kind of thing. So there's really nothing new about AI. It's actually been in the mix for quite a while now. And some of the leaders out there have been leveraging AI successfully for several years now. It's just been recently when it's really become available to the masses and really beginning to hit everybody's consciousness. And we talked about those four things of the future, right? And I'd have to say, to some extent, it's industries will have different. We talk about those four conditions that you just described. Certain industries would definitely be in that, super crowd progress because the nature of what they do highly lends itself to leveraging AI. Other industries, not so much because of the nature of what they do, what it takes to add value. For example, you're never going to take away being able to take part A and part B and actually put them together, right? And get them to fit and function. There's going to have to be that physical thing. And yeah, maybe a robot can do that, but AI may or may not be part of that picture. So the place of displacement of people is happening as we speak. Thousands of layoffs here in the US and certain organizations that have already successfully figured out how to displace. And again, those are highly transactional environments where it's easy to do that. And I do believe, this whole notion of a co-pilot and the evolution with people with AI is going to happen. And the stilted process or progress definitely going to be true too. Some of it is industry, some of it is the function, right? Certain functional areas, we'll see acceleration through pretty quickly, and others, not so much.
I'm thinking about if I was a leader and I wanted to digitally transform my business, would it be a mistake to start with technology without thinking about organizational readiness before then?
Well, the votes are all in. And the answer is, yeah, it's a huge mistake. One of the best practices out there that's evergreen is called business process management, right? And if you're not familiar with that, you should Google it and study up on it a little bit because it's evergreen, but it makes sense. It's around the three P's: it's people, it's process, and technology, and being very good at understanding those. But I'd like to make the point here: people, process, technology. Which one is last? It's technology, right? And we take a look at the data that's out there. You go out and Google just high failure rate for applying AI and digital transformation organization. You can Google that. And the studies suggest that 70 to 90% of initiatives, right, to adopt AI and other digital transformation efforts fail. And why is that, right? Poor change management, lack of leadership alignment, data silos, treating it as a tech upgrade rather than what it really is an evolution of the business, right? So it's a transition to operating differently, being more competitive in the future marketplace. So I got to tell you, I really cringe, Christine, when I hear this way too often. Is yeah, we deployed some training in how to use AI for all of our employees. And I sit there and I blink. You're taking peanut butter, you're smearing it all over the organization, saying, "Hey, here's this great thing. We're going to call it AI, and let's tell everybody about it and train them, and then sit back and hope something's going to be different or better." That approach, I believe, is doomed right out of the box.
So, what approach would you take then? I'm just thinking of anyone listening to this today, how would they start? Because it is an overwhelming thing.
It is. It is. Here's the best advice I could offer there. This has been echoed by many of the guests on my podcast is that it's got to be business outcome based. So we have to start with why are we going to do this? Why would we even consider using digital transformation? We got to come back and say, what's the business outcome that we're trying to accomplish as an organization? Better, faster, cheaper, some form of that, right? Better customer experience. We need to do things a lot faster. We need to grow the business, et cetera. We got to kind of solve for what are we trying to make improvements in and get very clear about the business outcome.
And when you say people, do you mean actually the staff, the employees, the people, the workforce? Who are we talking about?
Everybody, everybody, right? So on high, we got the CEO sitting on high saying, yep, what this is something we got to do. And they give instructions downward through the org chart. The next layer, they're like, sure, boss. And they go, what's that mean to me? And how's that going to change what I do? And then that cascades down the next layer in the org chart. Those people said, what's all this about? And it gets diffused and lost really, really quickly. So, if the CEO says, we're going to increase our speed to market from 6 weeks, or let's say 6 months, to get this product to market. And we are losing out in competition. We're way behind the curve of being successful at growing our business and keeping the jobs we have. We need to do that in 3 months or 3 weeks. And we're going to leverage technologies to dramatically improve the speed at which we get to market. That's a different message, right? And then you're coupling that message is, why are we making the change? And then you got to sell that from on high down through the org chart, but then we got to engage people with the how, and we got to answer their what's in it for me questions. And this is not simple to do. Change management is not sexy. Nobody wants to spend money on it, but I guarantee if you're not good at it, you're going to fail.
I want to get a bit practical because I'm thinking about people listening to this. I want to get into what advice would you give to executives to help prepare their organization for AI?
What I've learned and seen over and over again is that if you want people to actually support you and buy into and accept, we have to engage them in the process. And that's easy to say, but it's really a bit hard to do. So if you come back to process, one of the things I'm a strong advocate of is using some form of what's called value stream mapping. And I think all of us in leadership and management roles have seen, swim lane charts, the process maps where you have little boxes where everything's chasing around, from left to right in terms of a process unfolding. And, that's certainly a powerful tool for visualizing the process. But way beyond that, I'm a big advocate that you've got to hang some data on that. So, for example, I was working with a $1 billion automotive supplier, $1 billion plus, and it's supplying, assemblies that go into vehicles. And they were looking to drop a couple of $1 million this year in software and services to deploy product lifecycle management automation. And inside of that would be AI applications as part of that. And they're like, what's the return on investment to us as an organization? Why should we do this? So this led us to, basically guided them into building a value stream map of the process with an activity-based costing overlay with a matrix that dialed in and helped us understand all of the touches from an information perspective. What are all the different sources of information that our people use in the end-to-end process to bring a product to market? Right from the do I want to quote it, getting the quote, winning the business, and then 3 successive gates to get it fully in production, run at rate, manufacturing, supply chain stood up, and we're actually demonstrating and delivering a full volume to the OEM's requirements. What are all the IT systems that are involved with that? You have spreadsheets, email, Microsoft Outlook, you got the PLM software, you got the ERP software, you got the blah, 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 right? So in this particular organization, there's like 25 different sources of information, many of them managed as silos, and we're able to map at the step level who's doing what, how often does it happen, how much money are we spending, what's the first time quality capability, and then what are the primary and secondary touches from a data perspective. And we began to uncover very quickly that on average, at any given task, there are at least 3 different systems and technologies a person would have to sit there and doodle with, sometimes as many as 7 or 8 different systems they have to get in and out of. Well, that's all great, but then now because we have the data and we're able to overlay the activity-based costing model with the IT touches, with the first-time quality capability, we then could do this cool technique called Pareto analysis. And many of us would recognize that as the old 80-20 rule, which 20% of the steps equals 80% of the opportunities from a speed, cost, quality, customer, what is it? What is it you're solving for? That's what's super important. So here's the magic. if you are successful, and I highly advocate it, is developing that view of the current state of how we actually operate. What's our process? So we get really good at describing our process with data. Make that a experiential activity. Involve the subject matter experts. One of my favorite exercises before we do that is I sit down with subject matter experts. And I say, tell me about what makes you crazy. I get the subject matter experts, all the people that are going to be involved with making this happen, that are going to be directly affected by this change, to just tell me, what is it that you don't like about the process? And I capture all that. Those are called pain points.
It sounds like a huge undertaking, I have to say, something quite daunting to do.
Well, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
So please elaborate then. Because I'm thinking about anyone listening to this product podcast, if there is a shortcut or a quick win to do this, because activity-based costing it's quite an undertaking.
Well, it can be, but here's been my experience. And I've got a lot of cycles of doing this in every sort of business you can think of, from government to aerospace to automotive to healthcare to you name it, contact centers, you name it. Been there, done that. And it is very daunting to say, we're going to develop a good process understanding of everything going on in this business. Well, you're going to die of old age before you get all that built out anyway. So it's really important. I'll just take this. I talked about the supplier, right? The auto supplier. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pick one product. This is a key product line, and you're only going to quote it 15 to 10 or 15 times a year. You're only going to do 3 or 4 new programs a year. Let's just pick one, right? You draw way down to, okay, so let's actually walk this out all the way through the process end to end. Okay, so that was a pretty big undertaking. It took us probably about 6 weeks to get through it. But you can draw that back down and say, wait a minute, our challenge is to figure out how to automate, I'm going to make this up, our payables process. But then inside the payables process, there's different parts of the payables process. Payables related to what, right? So we might pick a very specific sort of payable. I'm talking about, healthcare services organization. So we're going to take a look at the process of paying for a hygienic a cleaning process. Let's just say it's cleaning, or it's some other process where we get into some issues, right? Or some misunderstandings, things don't go well. We say, let's just take that very, very specific one. It's 5% of everything we do, right? But it's a meaningful chunk. It's something that kind of goes end to end. And we say, let's just attach ourselves to that. Pretend we are that process, and we walk it out, right? So it's the user experience and it's the thing experience. So we use the thing, this is the transaction, the decision being made, whatever it is, and we hook ourselves to it and quite imagine it almost in our imagination. That what happens to me first, right? The procedure is done, right? What happens next? Well, we document the results. Okay, great. What happens next? Then it goes here and it generates, right, the payment request from the provider. Great. What happens next? Well, the provider gets it, and then, oops, we have issues. Okay, so let's talk more about the issues. If there's an issue, what happens? What are the process steps that occur? I call that the hidden factory. When things don't go well, what's all the things that we don't expect that we have to deal with? And you continue, but then you come up with, how often does it happen? Which people are involved or functions, right? What are the costs associated with that? How much time, money is spent there? What's the first time capability? How long does it sit there and wait? Inbox delays, right? If you send off a request to somebody, it's not going to be the first thing they do. It goes into a queue, a work queue, or it's got to wait for some batch processing in the computer systems, whatever. And we begin to capture that. But you would be amazed in how short a time, if you get the right people in a room and just talk it out, you'd be amazed at how quickly you can come up with a model saying, okay, this is what we have.
Just thinking, I just want to sort of shift into this idea. You mentioned change management. We sort of talked about it a bit earlier, but circling back to that, people are now starting to talk about AI-enabled teams. And from what I'm hearing, that is doing more with less. So leaner teams. But what does an AI-enabled team look like? And I'm trying to also think about, are we starting to sort of like see them using AI as a workflow rather than AI as, using an AI tool?
AI is kind of like, the old proverbial hammer. If all the only tool in your bag is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So that's one of the fallacies and shortcomings of thinking AI is the end all see all. It's not. It's another tool in our bag, right? So yeah, we have to equip people, train people, understand the AI team, what it is, how it can be used, when it's appropriate to use it, but then use the business outcome. I'll call it the business process manual, people, process, technology. Understand your process, zero into the 20% of the steps that actually make a difference. And then the team gets to focus there. That's what the AI enabled team needs to be focusing on. Which steps actually matter from a speed, cost, quality, customer experience, growth, whatever it is we're solving for, what actually matters. So we have to inform them, guide them, and say, great, how are we going to measure this, right? What do we know that the AI actually had any benefit to us? It's got to show up in our performance metrics somehow. And if you can't do that, why are we doing this?
I'm just thinking, on the final part of this podcast, I suppose my question is to you is thinking about the listeners to this podcast is what one piece of advice would you give them about starting on this journey for organizational readiness, let's say, change management? What one for something that's really overwhelming and, can be quite painful? Um, what one piece of advice would you give them to sort of start them off on their journey?
Well, if we're going to confine that to AI, yeah, there's two pieces of advice, right? The first is recognize AI for what it is, right? It's a set of tools that are best used very surgically to handle very specific tasks and problems, often one at a time. But anytime we're going to allow people to spend our precious time and money to fix something, we've got a task that with a very specific request to answer for me what is the specific business outcome and the benefit that will clearly and measurably make a difference to this organization. So if you're going to say, trust me, boss, now that's a non-starter, right? Insist on seeing the data and the proof that we're working on the right things.
I think that's a great piece of advice. So, I'd like to thank you, Ron, for joining us today. I think the key things to take away from this has been like start with the outcome, review your processes because it could be that you rather than slap AI or onto or automate a bad process, you could actually improve it. And also, rather than top down telling your organization we're doing this, you've got to sell it to in order to bring your organization along with it. I also think, from my perspective, is let your people start using AI because there's an awful lot of organizations that put up a lot of barriers. I think that there's actually an appetite amongst people like myself or workers to actually start using these tools. And I think once they start using them, they will also learn to trust them. So that's from my point of view as somebody who's being impacted by AI. And I'm adopting it every day. And I'm seeing great productivity gains just in the work that I do.
Awesome. That's a good summary. That's a good summary, Christine.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciated today's talk. I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Decision Loop, a podcast by Relic Solutions. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and share it with someone navigating the next era of intelligent planning. And for more insights on enterprise transformation, be sure to visit relicsolutions.com. And remember, in a world powered by AI, better decisions make the difference.